In the first two units of this course, you may remember, we focused on some basic concepts surrounding arguments and their structure. In the third unit, we're going to look at ways in which arguments can go wrong, that is, fallacies. Now, you will learn in a couple of units ahead that sometimes fallacies are committed by there being difficulties in the actual form or structure of a deductive argument. But in Unit 3, we're not focused on these types of fallacies. Rather, we're focused on informal fallacies. And what this means is these are problems in an argument that are generated by either bad assumptions that the arguer is making, bad presumptions that the argument makes, or some problem with the meaning involved in the terms that are used in the fallacy. In Unit 3, then, you will look at a dozen questions, a dozen arguments, and you will have to decide in a multiple choice way which fallacy is being committed. So identify the informal fallacies committed in the following arguments, circle the correct answer, and if no fallacy is committed, write good argument. Number 1. I find the material on this test so difficult that I don't think I'll pass. No one in the class is going to be able to do this. The fallacy committed here is hasty generalization. This is committed because we're going from premises that talk only about me, only about the singular case, to a general conclusion. Nobody in the class is going to be able to pass the test. Obviously hasty, since other members of the class may well perform in a different way than you. You may ask, why is this not the fallacy tu quoque? Remember, tu quoque is Latin for you also. Tu quoque fallacies are committed when in effect you say, I cannot accept what you argue against me because of some feature of you, because, for example, you would cheat even though you're arguing that cheating is wrong. You too would do it. That's the idea. Well, since tu quoque is committed only when you're addressing some other person's argument, notice in question number 1, no other person's argument is being looked at, and therefore tu quoque is not a possibility. So let's go on to number 2. Students have requested that we de-emphasize the importance of test taking. We cannot agree because de-emphasizing testing would lead to a lack of student interest in the material, and this would cause a drop-off in attendance, and quite soon no one would attend class. The right answer here is the slippery slope fallacy. A slippery slope is committed when a much more radical conclusion is drawn from premises which are considerably more innocent. And usually the conclusion is drawn in a step-by-step fashion. That is, you slide down the slope from a relatively innocent beginning to something a bit more severe to ultimately a conclusion of quite a strong force. No one would attend class. Obviously, this is not really going to follow from the fact that you emphasize or de-emphasize the tests. In other words, you could de-emphasize testing to some degree, and these radical conclusions wouldn't really obtain. Why is this not a straw man argument? Well, with a straw man argument, remember, you are again addressing somebody else's position, and you are unsympathetically interpreting that position so that it becomes easier for you to argue against it. But here we're not really arguing against anybody else's position. We're merely ourselves showing or attempting to show that a very strong conclusion follows from a relatively weak set of premises, de-emphasizing the tests. Okay, number 3. Just as all social laws require a lawmaker, so the laws of nature also require a maker. Hence, God exists. Well, this is a very fast argument for the existence of God. You may consider that it probably does involve some kind of fallacy. What is the fallacy? The fallacy of weak analogy is committed here. The reason for this is you're drawing a similarity or analogy between two cases which are not particularly similar. The two cases here are social laws or conventions on one hand and natural laws, physical regularities on the other. The weak analogy here has to do with whether or not these are created things. Obviously, human conventions, social conventions, are a matter of culture, and they are created. On the other hand, natural laws are not created, and therefore the conclusion that God must exist based upon that analogy is going to be fallacious. Why have we not committed the fallacy of hasty generalization, you may ask? Well, we're not here going from a small sample of social laws, finding that they are created by somebody, and then moving to a general conclusion that all social laws are created. Rather, we're crossing the categories between social laws and laws of nature and trying to see some connection between those two categories, hence the idea of analogy. All right, number 4. No laws should infringe upon the private activities of adults. Sexual activity between consenting adults is a private activity. Hence, there should be no laws prohibiting sexual activity between consenting adults. Well, you may be happy to know that this argument doesn't commit any fallacy at all. Certainly, it doesn't miss the point if you think about the premises. The premises are all related to, all on the point of whether there should be laws prohibiting sexual activity. It doesn't equivocate on any particular term that's used. It doesn't hastily generalize from a small sample. And it really is not a direct appeal to the people. It's not saying, hey, come on, believe this for no good reason. It's really giving you a reason to believe that there shouldn't be laws against sexual activity, the idea that they are private activity. In fact, this is a valid deductive argument. Now, of course, we've seen from Unit 2 that all valid deductive arguments are not sound. It may be that you don't believe the truth of both of the premises here, but that's a different matter, really. You've got no fallacy being committed. It just may be that the argument is unsound. Number 5. Defense buildups have a stimulating effect on the national economy. Since we are the nation, defense buildups have a stimulating effect on each of our incomes. This is the fallacy of division, because something which is true of a whole, namely the national economy, is attempted to be predicated to parts of the whole, namely yours and my incomes. It's a fallacy, of course, because something that has a stimulating effect on the entire economy may well not have a stimulating effect on the various parts of the economy. In fact, if you consider the particular instance here, defense buildups may have a stimulating effect on war-related parts of the economy, but have no effect, or maybe a detrimental effect, on yours or my income. Why, you may ask, is it not, say, the fallacy of accident? Well, this is not a fallacy of accident because that's committed when some general truth or some almost law-like statement is attempted to be applied to a particular instance. In other words, the instance is thought to come under or be subsumed by the general claim, when in fact that instance is an exception to the general claim. But notice we're not here saying that there's some general rule which fails to apply to you or me because we're exceptions. That's not what's going on. We're rather attempting to get a certain property which is true of a whole to apply to the parts of the whole, yours and my economy, when it doesn't in fact follow. So division again is the right answer. Number 6. Mr. Shepard, owner of the Canine Waste Removal Services, argues that his business is very good, since it always is picking up. Well, the fallacy here is the fallacy of equivocation. You equivocate when you come to the conclusion of your argument by relying upon or trading between two different meanings of the same term or phrase. Here, the phrase picking up can be understood, and must be understood, in fact, in two different ways in the two different premises. Picking up can mean that the business is increasing, that it's going in a lively way. It also can obviously mean removing the animal waste. So that equivocation between the two meanings of picking up is the reason why the fallacy is committed here. Nothing really follows about how good the business is doing by the fact that it's a business that involves some kind of picking up. Now, why is it not, for example, accident? Well, it's not accident, as we saw earlier, because no general rule is trying to be applied to a case which actually is an exception to the rule, and it really doesn't matter that this guy's business has anything to do with accidents of any sort. Okay, number 7. It can't be wrong for me to cheat on this test as you claim. After all, I saw you get an answer from Sally on last week's test. Well, this is the famous tu quoque fallacy. You too. Remember, the idea here is that you're trying to argue that you shouldn't accept the other person's claim, namely that it's wrong for you to cheat, not on the basis that there's something wrong with the claim, but on the basis that the person who puts the claim forward, himself or herself, has cheated. Well, that may be an interesting point to consider, but it really doesn't address whether the argument that they've put forward has force against you or not. It may well be that even a cheater can produce a very good argument that you should believe in regard to not cheating. Why is this not the fallacy of missing the point? Well, recall that you miss the point, really, when the premises of your own argument fail to establish the conclusion that you're trying to get to. In other words, it occurs when your premises seem to lead to a different conclusion than the one that you have drawn. So missing the point is always a problem internal to your own argument. It doesn't have to do with your addressing or trying to beat somebody else's argument. And of course, since that is what's going on in 7, missing the point is not the right answer. All right, number 8. Hurting innocent people is morally wrong. It is, as a consequence, morally wrong for dentists to practice their profession. Well, this is the fallacy of accident. Right. We have already looked at this fallacy before. It, remember, occurs when a general claim or a rule of some sort is attempted to be applied to a particular instance when that instance is an exception, doesn't really come under the rule. So the general claim here is that hurting innocent people is morally wrong. Generally speaking, that's true. On the other hand, there are many instances in which infliction of pain, especially when it's an attempt to save the person greater pain later, makes sense, and therefore it's not morally wrong. And of course, that's why dentists can practice their painful profession. Why is it not false cause, for example? Well, when you commit false cause fallacy, you assert that there is a causal connection, which in fact doesn't occur. But I don't think we're ready to deny that there is a causal connection between the doctors or the dentist practicing his profession and the fact that they cause pain. That does in fact occur. So there is no false cause here. The only causal claim that's part of the argument in fact goes through. But as I said, it is a case of accident. Number 11. Gleam costs less than Crest, has the most colorful packaging, and tastes the best of all those available. I conclude that Gleam is the most effective toothpaste on the market. This is the fallacy of missing the point. Remember, as I said earlier, you miss the point of your own premises when the conclusion that you draw really is not the conclusion apparently supported by the premises. So if you look at the premises here, Gleam costs less, has the more colorful packaging, and tastes best, none of those lead to the conclusion that this is the most effective toothpaste on the market. It may well support another conclusion, namely that it's the most popular toothpaste, but it doesn't really get the conclusion that it wants. Why does this not appeal to the people? Well, you appeal to the people when you, in effect, say to other people, simply, come on, believe this. Everybody does. Right? It's a very popular view. Well, notice that's not really what's going on in 9. We're not claiming that everybody thinks that Gleam is most colorful, or that everybody would agree that it costs less. There's not just an appeal to, as it were, mass liking of a certain position. Rather, there's this internal problem between the premises of the argument that's given and the conclusion that one attempts to draw. Okay, Number 10. Mrs. Black has been married 7 times, and each of her husbands has died of a heart attack. Obviously, Mrs. Black places her husbands under extreme stress. Well, this is the fallacy of false cause. Now, you may say if 7 of Mrs. Black's husbands have, in fact, died of the same thing, a heart attack, something may be going on, but one can't really come to the conclusion that it's the fact that Mrs. Black puts these husbands under extreme stress. It may be something else. There is a presupposition here that heart attacks are caused by extreme stress in each one of these cases. That's an assumption that we're making, which may well be fallacious. So we can't be sure of the causal connection here. There are other alternative explanations, and therefore false cause is the fallacy. Why isn't this, for example, a slippery slope? Well, remember, when you commit slippery slope, what you've done is come to a very severe conclusion on the basis of rather mild or not very severe premises. But here the premise is as severe as it gets. All of these people have died, so there's no kind of sliding down the slope to something more extreme. And number 11. I have studied every page of my logic text carefully. You can say then that I have studied the book carefully. Is any fallacy committed here at all? No, this is actually a perfectly fine argument. This is not a case of composition, although it's very similar in form to instances where the composition fallacy is committed. Remember, the difference between a case where composition is committed and one in which the argument is all right has to do with the fact that the property, which is true of the parts of a whole, is not, in fact, true of the entire whole. Okay? Then you have the fallacy. In this case, however, if you have studied carefully every page of the book, it does follow that you've studied the book carefully. How else would you study the whole book except page by page? So no composition fallacy is committed here. It's not, for example, like saying every part of my dinner tonight is under 100 calories. Therefore, my dinner is under 100 calories. Obviously, that is a fallacy because the under 100 calories property does not compose. It's not true of the whole as a result of being true of the parts. So no fallacy in number 11. And our last one, number 12, each person's happiness is a good to that person. And the general happiness, therefore, is a good to the aggregate of all persons. This is a very famous fallacy by John Stuart Mill. He didn't mean to commit this fallacy, but philosophers have since him claimed that it is the fallacy of composition. Why would we say that? Well, notice it doesn't follow that the good of all is in fact something that either many people or each person values on the basis of the fact that each of us values our own good. We could in fact be egoists. We could all value our own good and not hold the general good of any value at all. So again, we've got a case where the property which is true of the parts is attempted to be ascribed to the entire whole, where in fact it doesn't apply to that whole. So, the fallacy of composition. Now, there are a number of fallacies that we haven't gotten to in this test, and each of the 3 tests that you'll be taking, of course, has different kinds of questions on it, but I'd recommend that you read carefully all of the fallacies that are listed in Chapter 3, and perhaps try to get clear to yourself maybe a one-sentence definition of the fallacy. In other words, try to isolate what exactly it is that distinguishes the one fallacy from the other. If you do this, I'm sure you'll do well on the unit test. See you again.